Hi, it's Grace here. We don't all have the luxury of living in Cork, but if you do or you can visit during Cork Pride, please check out a talk I'm doing on queer Irish ancestors as part of a Women versus Everything live recording. This will be happening on the 30th of July in the Cork School of Music. That's the 30th of July in the Cork School of Music, starting at 12 p.m. Check out my Instagram at Love and Disgrace or any Cork Pride literature for more information. See you there.
Hi everyone and welcome back to Women versus Everything. I'm Jess, I'm here with my lovely co-host Grace, and this is a podcast about badass women throughout any period of history. We tell their stories, we talk about the challenges they overcame, and we just share awesome historical feminist content, really.
If you want to find women's stories that haven't gotten enough attention, we're at Women vs Everything on Instagram. Women versus Everything podcast is the name. And I'm making a big effort at the moment to have lots of updates on that, so you can catch the highlights from different episodes. And I made a TikTok.
Oh, you did?
Total sidebar, I joined TikTok.
I was going to use my excuse that I don't understand TikTok because I'm too old, but you're older than me, so I'm not sure I can use that excuse.
I didn't either. I had to get my Gen Z cousin to show me how to use it. Hi, Louise.
Thanks, Louise. You're great.
Yeah, so I made a TikTok. So I'm on TikTok under my usual social media name at Love and Disgrace, but I'm putting some of the content on Women versus Everything as well. And I made a TikTok from our Radcliffe Hall episode about the two medieval supposed scientists or surgeons who had like rubbish reasons why lesbianism existed. So, I mean, you can follow me there, but I post the media to our Women versus Everything one anyway. And can contact us, womenvseverything at gmail.com. And we love hearing from people. So if you have an idea for a topic or a woman we should cover, that's great. If you have constructive criticism for us about anything we've said, we want to hear it. We want to better ourselves. We have a corrections corner. We also are open to having guests on the podcast, because if our outrageous accents haven't told you, we are white Western European people, and we want to hear from either people in professions that we can't do because we can only do one profession, or we want to hear from women from different cultures that we don't, obviously know enough about. So if you want to do that, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have a Twitter, which I am running, and I'm trying to be better about posting on it, but I keep forgetting it exists. That is WV Everything Pod. So if you want to find us on there, then please give us a follow. And if you would like to give us money, we are on patreon.com/womenvseverything. And we are also on buymeacoffee.com/WV Everything Pod. Grace has been doing an amazing job with our Patreon recently, so there's lots and lots of cool stuff on there. There's show notes, there's bonus content, there's extra resources for you to check out if you want to learn any more about any of the subjects that we've talked about. Yeah, so go and find us on there, and the support tiers start from €1 a month, so every little bit really does help on that, and right now all that money is being ploughed back into paying our wonderful editor and making the podcast better.
Yes, I uploaded our outtakes.
Oh no, I haven't listened.
Every week or so there should be a new outtake coming up, but they're very funny.
Anyway, it seems like I just saw you because we recorded on Sunday.
I mean, speaking of outtakes, we recorded on Sunday because I deleted my recording.
So the timeline for episode recording versus episode releases is a little confusing right now, but for the benefit of the lovely listeners who did not just speak to you 3 days ago, how's your week been, Grace?
It's been good. I was just telling you Sunday how I'd like the busiest weekend ever, so I'm paying for it today. I'm really tired, massive headache, but it was worth it. I went out 3 nights in a row. I went to a Spice Girls themed drag night, which was really fun. And we watched
That is
Spice World, the movie, afterwards.
that is the queerest thing I've ever heard, and I'm very here for it.
I know, it was so good. It was just so much fun and very wholesome and gay. And not a lot of people stayed for the movie afterwards. I think there was only 5 of us,
Wow.
but like it was worth it. How's your week been?
Yeah, okay, actually. God, what have I been doing? I've been bunking off work a lot. On Monday, I bunked off work to go and have lunch and coffee with a lovely person who I know through journalist Twitter.
Yay!
And that was really, really fun. And then yesterday, I bunked off work in the afternoon to go to a very quiet showing of Doctor Strange at our local cinema.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love being self-employed. I get to do things like randomly go to the cinema in the middle of the day when there's hardly anyone else there.
Well, you're like the hardest working person I know, Jess, so you totally fucking deserve it.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I was like earlier, like, we can only have one profession, and Jess is like, you're also doing a PhD on top of being a, like, journalist and writer.
Yes, I mean, they're all sort of in vaguely the same field, but yeah, I mean, even doing a part-time PhD sometimes feels like a full-time job.
Yes.
So, yeah, but it's fine. The PhD is not forever. I love it, really, in case my supervisors are listening. No, my supervisors are genuinely amazing. They are very supportive and brilliant, and I'm very thankful because I honestly don't think I could do a PhD where I have to talk about sexual violence for 100,000 words if I didn't have amazing supportive supervisors. So, yay for them.
Yes, very much. Yeah, I've restarted so I've been working on this project for ages, which is essentially a PhD, but I haven't gone to uni and I'm not getting any of the like benefits from going to uni about it. 5 years ago, I interviewed some women about emotional abuse in polyamory because I just found lots of my friends were saying the same thing about their experiences. I've kind of restarted that, and I'm hoping to drop some more chapters on my website soon as well. So that's loveanddisgrace.co.uk.
Oh, I am looking forward to reading those.
If people would join the newsletter, I'd really appreciate it. So I'm not so sharing into the void. I'm feeling overwhelmed.
The first chapters you did on that was so powerful and so interesting.
Yeah, and then I burnt out and couldn't look at it for about a year.
Relatable, deeply relatable. I am looking forward to reading the next bit. Oh, speaking of websites and side projects and things, I accidentally started a new side project.
Oh, there we go. Tell me everything.
With all my free time. Yeah, I have a theatre blog now.
Oh my god, that's so perfect for you.
Which I was talking about doing for ages, and then I realised that I had like many shows booked this year after not really being able to go to the theatre for the last couple of years. Yeah, so there's only one review on it so far because I've only seen one show since I started it. But I am seeing many shows in the next couple of months, so there will be lots of reviews on there.
Excite! What shows are you going to see?
Oh my goodness. Okay, we are going to see Fantastically Great Women Who Changed the World, Legally Blonde, Come From Away, we're going to see Waitress the musical, we're going to see Six the musical, Billy Elliot, and then later in the year we are going to see The Book of Mormon.
Oh my god, that's like the best year ever.
I feel like there's one more this year, but I can't remember what the last one is. That might be all of them.
I've seen The Book of Mormon. It's fucking brilliant. I loved
Is
it
it?
so much.
So yes, if anyone wants to hear me ramble about theatre, or read me rambling about theatre, it's on notjustthewestend.com.
The world exists outside London?
Apparently.
The only thing I've booked for the rest of the year is, I've booked to see a live showing of Night Vale, the podcast.
Amazing. Which I've never listened to, but I know so many people who love it.
It was kind of like the vice versa for me. It's someone posted in the Cork subreddit that they were coming to Cork, and I was like, oh, I'll give that a listen. And then I just loved the first few episodes I listened to, and I booked a ticket straight away, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Should we dive into the topic?
Yes, let's dive into today's topic. I feel like we should also, though, say something about, 2 mass shootings in 1 week in America, just to acknowledge it, and just to say the world's on fire.
Yeah, it's so upsetting. It's so tragic, and it's so infuriating because it's so avoidable. So American listeners,
especially those who are minorities, whose skin is a different color to white, who's, Like, Jesus.
We're thinking of you. We love you. We hope you're as okay as you can be. Yeah, it just sucks. I don't know what else to say. It's just, it's just horrifying.
Yeah, when we are earning millions of monies, we will donate to charities every time we mention
Yes,
something like this.
absolutely. Absolutely. And if you would like to go and support any fabulous causes who are working on solving these problems, then we encourage that. Please go and do that. We would like that very much.
So, speaking of trying to solve complex world problems,
Oh boy.
shall we introduce the topic for this week?
Yes, let's do that.
So, I chose the person this week, and Jess has been given the background details. So, do you want to introduce the lovely listeners to the details?
Yeah, so I believe that we're actually going to be talking about two individuals on a theme this time, if I've understood that correctly. But today's topic is all about North Korean defectors.
Mm-hmm.
Women who defect specifically. So I've done lots of kind of background research on sort of the history of North Korea, how it came to be in existence, how it came to be what it is, kind of what we know about it in many areas is actually not all that much. What life is like for women and why they choose to defect, and then what they go through when they do, and all of those things. So I think before we go any further, we should say that this one has all of the content warnings. This one is...
Yeah, massively.
There are parts of this that are just bonkers, but a lot of this is just bleak.
This week's episode, I've actually chosen 4 women who experienced these themes in very different ways. And one is Yoni Park, who defected as a child. And I felt like we couldn't do this episode without mentioning her because she is the most famous activist and defector. Daeun Lee, who was a soldier in North Korea, who's now defected, but I don't have much information about where she is currently. And Mira and June, who I don't think that is their real names, but unfortunately when they defected, they were exploited into sex trafficking.
Yeah, so this one is going to be, we're going to be talking a lot about state-sanctioned oppression and violence, and a lot of references to sexual violence, sex trafficking, torture, imprisonment, all of these sort of horrendous things. So if you want to skip this one, we get it.
Yes, we understand why. And if you're going to stick with us, we're going to try and be as sensitive as we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. While acknowledging that this one is really complicated and is really upsetting. So where do we want to start?
Do you want to start with some of the history of North Korea, maybe, and how it ended up the way it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. So North Korea, such that it is, has only existed since 1945. Prior to World War II, Korea was a country. It was one country. And there were lots and lots of very, very complicated factors that led to this split. So during the war, the Allied leaders were kind of considering like the question of what Korea's future would look like after Japan surrendered. And they reached an understanding that Korea would be liberated from Japan, but ultimately what they did was created this thing called an international trusteeship, which essentially means that outside powers are governing until such a point as the country is deemed ready to self-rule. So at something called the Moscow Conference of Foreign Ministers in December 1945, this trusteeship was formed, and it was 4 major world powers, which at the time was the United States, Great Britain, the USSR, and the Republic of China. And it was supposed to last up to 5 years. But there were lots of factors that came into this, which included Korean opposition to this trusteeship. Lots of people weren't very happy about this. The onset of the Cold War and all of the complications that came with that, and the very fraught and complex relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, which essentially kind of nullified this, and it sort of broke down this framework for what at the time was supposed to re-establish a single Korean state. So at this point, it was referred to the United Nations, and in 1948, so the UN failed to come up with an outcome that the Soviet Union would accept. So they held a series of elections in the south specifically, which was occupied by the US at the time, and then the north was occupied by the Soviet Union. So the election in the south was won by a man called Syngman Rhee, who was backed by the Americans, and he became the first president of South Korea. And in the meantime, Kim Il-sung was consolidating his position as essentially the leader in the north. And this was at the point where the two states formally split. This was at the point where the Republic of Korea in the south was formed and the so-called Democratic People's Republic of Korea was formed in the north within weeks of each other. The US supported the south, the Soviet Union supported the north, and each of the two governments claimed that they were the rightful owners, governors of the whole of Korea. So ever since then, it's been two separate countries.
So it's kind of the usual suspects causing trouble in another country and then stepping back and saying, oh, look how much of a mess that country's made of itself.
I mean, yeah, kind of. There was a lot of that going on, to be fair. So what's interesting and that I didn't realise is that actually both of the regimes in the south and the north ultimately considered this to be a temporary solution.
Okay.
They saw it as just very controversial. It wasn't expected that this would be the state of things forevermore. So for a couple of years, between 1948 and 1950, there was a series of conflicts that were happening along the border. And then in 1950, North Korean forces invaded South Korea, which essentially triggered the Korean War. The United Nations tried to intervene. Specifically, they tried to intervene to protect the South, and they sent armed forces led by the US. While those forces occupied the South, regime from the North was trying to unify the country under its parameters. Again, there's a lot of very, very complicated factors going on here. The short version is that what the UN intended to do was to restore the border along this line called the 38th parallel, which was where the border had previously been settled. But President Ri of the South argued that the attack had essentially obliterated that boundary. Meanwhile, someone called General Douglas MacArthur, who was the UN's commander-in-chief at the time, stated that his intention was not just to drive the North Korean forces back behind the border, but actually to unify the country.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, the North invaded over 90% of the South until the US-led counterattack pushed them back.
Jesus.
So this is years that this conflict is going on. So it really sort of started to stabilise in 1951, where both sides began to consider an armistice, and this border along the 38th parallel was somewhat stabilised. But President Ri wanted the war to continue until Korea was unified under his leadership. So again, it's this thing, both sides essentially think that they are the rightful rulers of the entire country.
Yeah, it's just so fucking messy, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Americans proposed that they created a line that passed through the city of Pyongyang, which was far further north than this front line along the 38th parallel.
Yeah.
But the Chinese and North Koreans eventually agreed to keep the border on the military line of contact, but there was this, long drawn out negotiation process trying to work out what on earth was happening with this. And the result of it eventually was that the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed on the 27th of July 1953, and there was created this 4-kilometre, which is about 2.5 miles, buffer zone between the two states.
Yes.
It still exists. It's known as the Korean Demilitarized Zone.
Mm-hmm.
And fun fact, people go there on tourist trips, which I find deeply weird.
Yeah. Well, I think you can even go on a holiday to North Korea, but it's quite difficult, and you have to stay with guides all the time, and you're very regulated when you're out there, and you're only allowed to take photos of certain areas, and I find that very weird as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Like, I think there's some countries where you can't, but for most countries you can. I just can't imagine why anyone would want to.
Yeah.
But there we go. But yeah, people who go, to South Korea for whatever reason, for holidays or work or whatever, like they just go on these like tour trips to the border, which has been referred to as the world's most dangerous tourist trap.
That's interesting. I can kind of see in that like morbid fascination, as someone who loves true crime, like I would love to go and see it,
I think that must be what it is. Yeah, the fascination with the dark side of life, I suppose.
But then hearing how it's a dangerous tourist trap, I'm like, oh, maybe not. Why is it the world's most dangerous tourist trap?
Well, this is the thing. Like, I've seen sources that argue that it is, and sources that argue that actually it's mostly pretty safe as long as you follow some
Yeah.
basic rules. It's still, I don't know if you would say technically a war zone, but
Okay.
it's a small area of separation between two very highly contested states, and it's heavily armed and all of these things. So
Yeah. From what I've seen on pictures online, there isn't much there. It's a few buildings and soldiers standing around, and it's not a pretty area. It's very bleak and flat around it. And, it's kind of one of those things I think you just would go there to say you've gone there,
I think that's it. I think people do it to say they've done it.
Yeah.
There we go. It's still there, and tourists go there, which okay. That's how it kind of got to the place it is today, with these two separate, like wildly different countries, just separated by 2.5 miles of no man's land.
How did North Korea become then what it is today?
So the same family has essentially retained absolute control over North Korea since 1945.
Okay.
This man Kim Il-sung, who essentially was the first ruler of North Korea, he developed this real cult of personality around him. And there's this philosophy they call Juche. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's Juche, but it's the official state ideology. And the country's government describe it as, quote, Kim Il-sung's original, brilliant and revolutionary contribution to national and international thought.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It's all about strength, self-reliance. It states that, quote, man is the master of his destiny.
Okay, so libertarianism.
Yeah, it kind of in a very extreme form.
It doesn't seem that far removed from like the likes of Donald Trump would do.
The thing, the cult of personality, that's exactly what that made me think of.
Yeah.
So when he died in 1994, he kind of passed that cult of personality down to his son, who was Kim Jong-il, and then to his grandson, Kim Jong-un, who is the current ruler of North Korea. So these three men, all from the Kim family, have been completely in charge of this country. So
it's only been 3 generations.
Yeah.
And it's such a fucking mess.
Yeah. And of course, they deny that there's a cult of personality around the family. And they say that the people are devoted to their leaders and this philosophy. It's a dictatorship. It's a hereditary dictatorship and an absolute monarchy. And it is a mess.
And a cult. If you apply the, the tick boxes to see if something meets the criteria of a cult, it's that too,
It is. It's a country-sized cult that's ruled with violence and fear and intimidation.
I don't know if it's still online, but there was a blog years ago, and it was just a photo blog of Kim Jong-il looking at things.
Right.
Photo after photo of him looking at random things, and yeah, it was very funny. And I think, and I'm so guilty of this as well, there's this kind of like disbelief, like, is this can't be real kind of thing about the cult of personality, that it ends up like satire to kind of try and rationalize it in your mind. And, like what inspired me to do this episode was like in our Utrecht episode when we talked about people being stalked essentially and monitored by government officials. I said, that's like some North Korea shit. And there is this, like I said, for me, it is trying to make sense of it in my mind and trying to maybe even like belittle it a little bit in my mind, because I can't quite go there with like some stuff in the world is this bad. But that does then take away from actually like how horrific it is for the people living there.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is it. Like some of this, I was reading and I was thinking, some of these things I tried to like fact check in 2 or 3 different places, because I was like, this is bonkers.
That's it. It's also like, this cannot be real, can it? What? And that people are kind of in a Stockholm syndrome way, like so in love with these something. Did you find out much about Songbun status? Because that comes up quite a bit.
Yeah, so I first came across this in an article in The Guardian, which talks about sort of the different life stages and how that goes for your typical sort of North Korean citizen. But Songbun is essentially a caste system.
Oh, okay.
So a child is born, they'll be given one of these categorizations, and I found a couple of ones that used a couple of different terms, but the terms I found most often, there's 5, and from kind of quote unquote best to worst, they go special, nucleus, basic, complex, or hostile.
Oh my God, basic.
So the parents register the child's birth, and then their songbird status will be stamped into their file. And officially, it's not something that's static, and it's something that can change depending on someone's circumstances and someone's actions and all of those sorts of things. But in practice, it's really, really heavily influenced by family background, by parents and even grandparents and even more distant relatives and their actions and their political allegiance and all of those sorts of things. And it really controls every kind of element of people's lives. So it's used to determine where they'll be allowed to live, where they'll be allowed to go to university.
God.
Yeah, where they might work, and whether they'll be able to join the Korean Workers' Party, or just the party as it's known, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later, but which, really is a huge, huge factor in someone's quality of life. And Human Rights Watch believes that the main purpose of this system is essentially for the regime to identify and eliminate political threats internally.
So, like, just starting with one of our people, Yeomni Park, I'm just going to talk about all the women's childhoods first, and then we can move on to their individual stories, because there was so many overlapping themes in their childhoods. Yeomni Park, one thing I found really disturbing was she had 2 grandparents with amputations and severe injuries from the war and building railroads, which I was just like, God, that level of trauma in the fucking family must be so hard anyway. But then also her father's family lost Songbun status because her uncle was convicted of rape, which, I mean, great. We want measures. We want harsh measures for rapists. But it was like the entire family got this conscious stigmatization, which really impacted her economic situation. So it makes sense, like you said, then it impacts what jobs you can get and where you can live. So her dad also got sick, and he was in the Workers' Party, and he got unwell. And, much as we want to complain about our own government's treatment of sick leave and stuff like that, it was just like, well, you're too sick to be in the Workers' Party anymore. Goodbye, So he had to get a job at a foundry, which was very low income. So he turned to smuggling Chinese cigarettes, clothes and rice as a way to support his income. It's economic violence, keeping people in that cycle of poverty.
It is.
And desperateness.
And this theme of people being punished and persecuted for the actions or perceived actions of their family members it's something that came up again and again and again. And I really think it's part of the system of control.
Yeah.
I think it forces...
police each other.
Exactly. It forces citizens to be complicit in the regime against each other by essentially keeping each other in line, because if one person steps out, then the whole family will be persecuted.
It's a level beyond weaponizing shame, because it is... our literal survival depends on you towing the line.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So Yeomni Parks, then her father was arrested for illegal trading and sentenced to hard labour at a re-education camp. Horrific. And because of his expulsion from the Korean Workers' Party, the 2 sisters had to stop going to school, which is something I'm seeing again is stopping going to school because they have to work. And Park actually contracted pellagra due to malnutrition, and she has memories of resorting to eating dragonflies and insects kind of out of desperation and starvation.
Yeah.
So I just have here pellagra it's a disease caused by a lack of the vitamin B3, and it sounds horrific. It's lots of skin peeling and bleeding and very painful.
This intense poverty and starvation, that was a theme that came up a lot as well. It seems like that is something that huge numbers of the population suffer from.
And actually, if you visit North Korea, one of the things you're banned from taking photos of is people that are deemed too skinny, that look malnourished, because they're trying to perpetuate the story that everything is fine there.
Yeah.
You know?
It's all part of the propaganda machine.
So in 2003, because her dad was put in this hard labor camp, they moved back to her mother's hometown of Koan. And Yamni was sent to live with her aunt in another village as well. But because her mom had changed residence illegally, so I guess there's some sort of bureaucratic enforcement about staying where you live and declaring intent to move and everything, she was arrested.
Yeah, you need permission to move to live in different areas, essentially, yeah.
Oh my God, that's horrific. So I guess her mom was so desperate and like, look, my sister might take care of the kids better. You know, there might be a better economic situation, or I've found work there, so I need to move there. So Yamni's dad then was released from prison on sick leave because he falsely promised the warden a massive bribe, you know. So it's this real desperate behavior, putting your life at more risk to try and get out of the dangerous situation you are in. And Ji-yoon, another one of those stories we're going to do, she stopped going to school at 11 to work as well. And actually something Mira and Yaomni talk about is the underground market accessing DVD players, cosmetics, fake designer clothes, USB sticks, and illegal and foreign movies. So the propaganda machine in North Korea is you can't consume media from anywhere outside of North Korea, but also everyone is, because they're accessing this illegal market. And this is like the inspiration for them to defect, all these women, kind of like, especially the films brought in from China.
Oh, interesting.
So Jiyun said, I was really into Chinese movies and I thought all men from China looked like that. I wanted to marry a Chinese man, and I looked at leaving North Korea for several years, you know. Her father was also a former soldier and party member, and her father was really strict and ran the household basically like the military, tight schedule, beatings. Mira wanted to become a doctor, but this was stopped by her dad. You know, so she said, my father was suffocating. He wouldn't let me watch foreign movies. I had to wake and sleep at exact times. I didn't have my own life. You know, so this man has drank the Kool-Aid, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a microcosm of what's happening on a national scale, happening in
absolutely.
homes. And I think, from what I've read, I think that kind of thing happens a lot.
Absolutely, because it's the only way to stay safe.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. A dictatorial regime results in these dictatorial households and on an individual level. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to tell Yamni Park's story first because, believe it or not, it is the least traumatizing, which is horrific. Anyway.
Okay, hit me with it.
So her dad escaped from prison with this false bribe, and he's like, we just need to get out of here. We need to go to China. Similar to Ji-yoon, Yamni had been watching illegally imported DVDs, and when she saw Titanic, she was especially like, whoa, you know, this country we're living in is not what is going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And this movie taught her the true meaning of love and gave her a taste of freedom. In this period, her older sister left for China without notifying them. So her older sister defected. The problem is then this whole Park family could be punished for her sister's escape. So her sister's name is Yumni. So they all were like, now or never, and escaped North Korea by traveling through China with the help of brokers who smuggle North Koreans into China.
I learned some interesting stuff about how most people get out, like the routes most people take. Do you want to hear about that?
Yes, please. Yeah, let's do it.
I actually kind of assumed when I first started researching this that most people who defect would go from North Korea straight to South Korea because it's right there.
Right.
But actually, like, most people don't, because the demilitarized zone is so heavily guarded and so dangerous. Actually, what most people...
It is not demilitarized.
No, it's highly
There's
militarized.
landmines on both sides. Yeah,
Exactly.
Absolutely.
What the overwhelming majority of people do is they go over the northern border to China, usually via either the Tumen or Yalu rivers, and then they have to smuggle their way across China, which of course is an enormous country. Just geographically, it's huge.
Jesus. Yeah.
And they try to make it to one of the southern borders with Laos or Vietnam. From there, they cross into usually Thailand or Cambodia, and then go to one of the South Korean embassies and ask for help. This journey can cost about 5,000 5,000 American dollars to these brokers who arrange it. So it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And if they get caught in China, they get forcibly repatriated.
Yes, that's right. So in China, North Korean defectors are considered illegal immigrants, basically. And once they return to their homeland, they're subject to torture and imprisonment because it's considered treason against the fatherland.
Yeah, absolutely. For women in particular, if they're found and they're sent back, if they're pregnant, they often have forced abortions performed upon them at that point. Or if they give birth to a baby, the baby is often killed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's
Even if it's by two North Korean parents?
it didn't specify. It didn't specify. It just said if they're found and brought back and they're pregnant, that this is often what happens.
Yeah, I found a thing that said many defectors fled during the 1990s. There was a severe famine known as the Arduous March, and that caused the death of at least 1 million people in North Korea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but since Kim Jong-un came into power in 2011, the number of people defecting each year has fallen by more than half. And that's because there's tighter controls at the borders and brokers have increased their price.
Yeah, it's just got harder
There's
and
tougher
riskier.
security. And there's even electric fences along one of those rivers that you mentioned.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's thought that the number of North Korean refugees hiding in China is between 50,000 and 200,000.
Wow.
And that's a huge range. So obviously, to me, that translates as we've no fucking idea.
Yeah, like they don't have a clue. There's a lot, but they don't have a clue.
Yeah. So even though China signed the UN Convention relating to the status of refugees, the Chinese government sees these people as migrants without residence permits. And so they're not allowed to apply for asylum.
It's just hugely, hugely risky and dangerous. And I think, to me, that shows how desperate the situation is. That this is what they're willing to go through to escape it. This is what they're willing to risk to escape it.
70% of North Korean refugees in South Korea are women, but the number has risen in the last few years. And in 2017, it was thought 85% of the refugees were women.
Yeah, the stats I found, the most recent stats I could find were estimating between 80 and 85%.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So I found some stuff about like life in South Korea that we can get back to later. But so basically they're doing this trip into China, Yamni and her family.
So how old was she at the time? You said she was a child.
Yeah. So they got back to Seoul in 2009.
So she'd have been 15 or 16?
15 or 16 by the time they got to Seoul, and all this was a few years earlier.
Yeah.
In 2007 is when they crossed into China via the Yalu River, and then there's 3 mountains to cross into China. And that was with human traffickers. One of the criticisms of Yamni Park, in different interviews she gives, sometimes her facts move around. And this could be, that she was a child, or we're not sure. But
also worth acknowledging, trauma has amazingly, significant effects on memory.
Oh, it fucks your memory. So she has said in some interviews that her dad was sick and stayed behind because he thought his illness would slow them down. But then in other speeches, she said their dad joined them in the crossing to China. So, it could be they left their town in North Korea and then he got better and met them at the border. They tried to find Yumni by asking traffickers about her whereabouts, but they couldn't find her and they presumed she was dead. Sadly, once her dad got to China, he was diagnosed with inoperable colon cancer. The family lived in secret in China and her dad died a year later. Yeah, so I think this is what his sickness that got him kicked out of the Workers' Party was, because he'd been very sickly for a while. And they kind of couldn't mourn him because they thought they'd be discovered by Chinese authorities. So they ended up burying his cremated remains in the grounds of a nearby mountain. Yamni's mother said they paid 2 people to carry his body up the mountain and bury him there instead. So again, we've a bit of conflicting stories. But I mean, either way, it was horrific. They found a Christian shelter and in Qingdao, and that city had a huge Korean population. So they were able to evade the attention of authorities. And then these Christian missionaries were like, we'll help you get to South Korea. But they had to go there via Mongolia. And at the border there, the guards stopped them and threatened to send them back to China. But obviously this is worse than a death sentence, you know, because the Chinese authorities would then send them back to North Korea for torture. So Park said basically her mother took out razor blades and the two of them held the razor blades and threatened they were going to kill themselves basically together. And they were saying goodbye to one another. And this was a pact that they'd made before, like, if we get caught, this is what we're going to do. So they were serious about this threat.
Because they'd rather die than go back.
I mean, fair, you know, considering what's waiting for them when they go back.
Sounds entirely fair.
So the guards, when they saw this, let them through, but they were placed under arrest and kept in a detention center at the capital of Mongolia. Yamini Park in a podcast interview with our friend Jordan Peterson.
Oh no. Oh no.
I know. I think this is also why a lot of people criticize her, as she has made friends with some controversial people. Yamini said, you know, she thinks the guards were maybe just toying with them because Mongolia's official policy is to send North Korean refugees to South Korea, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it was maybe like, I don't know, a kickback against them or something. But eventually they were sent to the airport and they were flown to Seoul. And once they got there, they received training at the Southern Korean Ministry of Unification's resettlement center called Hanawon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that resettlement center came up in your research, Jess?
Yeah, it did, actually. So defectors, when they get to South Korea, they go through this period of essentially investigation and a bit of a debrief with the South Korean intelligence services. And they spend normally about 3 months at this institution called Hanawon, which is kind of a school where they learn lots of things about South Korean society. So they learn even the really basic things like how to navigate the public transport system, how to get a job, how to use a ATM. And they also learn all about South Korean citizenship and culture and the differences and how that works and how the democracy works there. And then there's these community centres as well that provide resources for the refugees. So during this kind of initial few months, they help them with practicalities like getting a bank account, getting a mobile phone, kind of getting settled in and acquainted to their local community. And then normally once they leave Hanawon, they're assigned to a rental home. So there was one person whose story I read who was talking about this, and she said that she was left with a box of food, just kind of basic things like ramen, rice, oil, which was supposed to last for a few days. And then they have someone, kind of almost a sort of point person who can be a counsellor, or sometimes it's a defector who's already there and settled, and they'll help them out with getting settled in and provide any support they need. And then she says, then they have to live their own lives. They get this it's kind of a orientation process, I guess, kind of. And then, and then they're kind of left to get on with it.
I was very suspicious of this Hanawon place from the south. Like, I don't know, my mind just immediately went to like, oh my God, is it like just another brainwashing camp? But that actually sounds like very dignified and kind treatment of refugees.
It does sound like that, doesn't it? I read one story which I was going to bring this up later, but I think it's actually relevant here because it was a really fascinating story about a man who defected, and he's the only known openly gay defector.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, like
we love you.
Honestly, like I'm going to put the whole story in the show notes. Read the whole story. It's amazing. The latest information I could find was that he was in the process of trying to prove that his marriage to a woman in North Korea was over so that he could get married to his Korean American boyfriend.
Oh my God. What's his name?
Jang Yong-jin.
Jang Yong-jin, we love you.
Yeah, I'm very happy for him. He's actually one of the rare people who defected straight over the border at the demilitarized zone.
No way.
Yeah. He crawled across this landmine-filled no man's land and escaped. And this was headline news. This was a big deal because not many people managed to pull that off. The reason that I mention that here is because the way it was described in his article, every defector who arrives from the north undergoes several weeks of compulsory grilling by the South Korean National Intelligence Service to check they are not spying for the north.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So that kind of shows that, yes, it probably is to a certain extent you know, all these useful services that they need and helping them get settled in and get acclimated, all those things, but it's also kind of checking up on them. And what's interesting is that Zhang was, his sort of period of that initial grilling was, rather than a few weeks, it was 5 months.
Oh dear. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, it's difficult to know kind of how much of it is a really sort of progressive and civilized treatment of refugees and how much of it is kind of disguising something a little bit more.
Yes. Sinister,
more
yeah.
sinister.
I mean, the bar is so low. I mean, in Ireland, we have this thing called direct provision, and it's fucking horrific. So the bar is so low for treating refugees kinder,
Yeah.
you know, that it probably is kinder and still pretty bad, to be honest, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like, I just also feel a bit like, I don't know, I will never visit North Korea because, you know, I'm from Cork and I'm queer, so it's just like kicking back at things is written into my fucking genes, you know. And just even something like this where it's good intention, I can just feel myself being like you're just telling me the rules of your culture now again, you know, that I need to fit into. And I, you know, later I'll talk about life in South Korea for North Korean defectors, but there is a lot of focus on assimilation, you know, and fitting in, and, you know, yeah, it's fucking bullshit.
And
Anyway.
I think you see that everywhere. I mean, when it comes to how countries treat refugees, the UK is not looking good, like, at all. The UK is terrible. And one of the things that I think we hear again and again from the people who are opposed to accepting refugees in the UK is they say, oh, well, they don't try to assimilate, they don't try to fit in. And I'm just like, well, why, just because someone has escaped from violence or repression or whatever horrific circumstances it was that led them to that, why should they have to completely disavow and abandon everything about their culture and their previous life?
Completely. Yeah.
Why should they have to blend in as if they've been there forever?
Exactly.
I just think it's a horrible way of treating people, really.
The world's on fire.
It is.
Yeah. So, yeah, Yamni Park and her mom did have trouble settling in South Korea. They got jobs as shop assistants and waitresses, and Yamni only had a second grade education, but she got her high school equivalency after 18 months of studying.
Good for her.
She got to go to university in Seoul, and she was cast in an EBS television program called Now on My Way to Meet You, which is a variety show featuring North Korean defectors. This is very interesting. So when I was researching, you know, famous North Korean women, what first came up was like they were all written by men, Western men, highlighting women who are part of the regime. And I was like, that's not what Girl Boss Goals is.
Yeah.
We do not stand women that shit on other people.
No.
You know? Like, task failed successfully. Anyway, I was angry about that. And then I found lots of women that are North Koreans on these reality shows in South Korea. So there's this nearly kind of fetishization of them and their identity. And lots of like bachelorette type reality shows, like South Korean men like North Korean women because they're meeker or something, you know?
Yeah.
Just like a bit like, ooh, look at the freaks kind of reality TV shows, you know? It felt quite exploitative as someone from the outside looking in. And it's like, if I was there and this is the only way you get empowerment and a big paycheck, you're going to fucking go for it. So also go girl, you know, like, get it, you know. And Yamini Park is beautiful, so like she would have had a lot of success with that. And the South Korean National Intelligence Service in 2014 informed her that her sister Yooni is alive and was in South Korea.
Oh, no way.
And they eventually reunited with her. And Yamini went on to move to, I think she still lives in the United States. She went to Barnard College and went to Columbia University School of General Studies, and she majored in economics. She published a memoir in 2015 sharing her journey from defection to higher education. If you Google North Korean activist, she's the one that comes up. And I had a lot of debate about whether we should feature her or not. Because obviously featuring a woman, you're highlighting her. But she's a very controversial figure.
Yeah.
Because she's come out as saying some pretty shitty right-wing stuff, which I psychologically is fascinating to me, you know? Specifically, her most famous quote is that PC culture is, quote, worse than living in North Korea, you know, or worse, like something. Basically those lines. So listen, we love you. I see you. I love you. I hope that you get well. Yeah, it's such an obvious trauma reaction to me, you know?
Yeah.
Because when she's explaining what was behind that opinion, it was all to do with her own insecurities and maybe what I would call, you know, if I'm armchair psychologizing for a minute, I think she had an emotional flashback that this like, hey, we should look into this stuff about pronouns and I think that felt like control to her, and she got a flashback to what it was like living in North Korea and went into blame sooner than look at her own shit, because again, this is probably a woman who'll fall apart if she lifts the lid on that, you know? The other possibility is she's a public figure, you know, her socials are pretty mad. So it also could be like she's getting more money for interviews and clicks on her profiles by saying controversial things. I think it possibly could be that as well. Get it, girl, but, you know, not like that.
Yeah, it's really complicated. It's a really complicated one.
Yeah, and I know, Jess, you and I have talked about this behind the scenes a lot with another case where, you know, it was someone we were debating whether to highlight or not.
Yeah, it's really complicated. And I think with this one, like, in this wider theme, I think we have to acknowledge her because she's so well known, but also there are these things which are not so great. So,
you know, when it was my personal decision, I was like, look, I'm happy to highlight her as like, this is a story we can learn a lot from, including maybe how not to behave, you know, like.
Yeah. Really disappointing, to be honest. I think you probably have a point that some of it is trauma, because I mean, God, I'm sure this woman is carrying huge amounts of trauma. So this is the part of the show where we shout out our wonderful supporters on Patreon. So we have a tier on our Patreon which is called Co-Conspirator, which is anyone who's giving us €10 and above every month. And we said that we would give them a shout out on the show to just say how fabulous they are and how much we appreciate them. So Grace, do you want to tell us about our lovely co-conspirators?
Shout out to Wazen dear. You are very dear to our Wazes. And my beautiful friend, Charlotte Hadley. I love you so much. You're an absolute babe.
Oh, thank you both so much. And if you would like to get your name on the show, then head over to patreon.com/womenvseverything and support us at the €10 a month level or above.
Even $1, baby. So then we have Mira and Yoon's stories that overlap a bit. So Mira defected when she was 22, and she's, you know, really into Chinese movies. She liked the handsome Chinese men, which, you know, relatable. After years, she found a broker who would help her escape because her family had close ties to the government. So the article I found didn't release a lot of information about her childhood. But her family did have close ties to the government. Like I said, her dad was an ex-soldier and all that. So they were really nervous that, like, she was a spy and would report them to the authorities, you know. Mm-hmm. But she found someone, and maybe that's why she found, like, the shittiest person ever. So she didn't have money to pay the broker directly. So, like many defectors, there's this agreement for indentured servitude to be sold and work off her debt, you know. Mm-hmm. She presumed she would be working in a restaurant, but she'd been tricked and was targeted by a smuggling ring who recruits female North Korean defectors into the sex industry.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so she also went across the Tumen River into China and was brought to Yanji, where she was handed to a Korean Chinese man who is known as the director. Yanji is in the heart of the Yanbian region. And it's, again, got loads of ethnic Koreans, so it's a busy hub of trade for North Korea. Mm-hmm. And it's also the main Chinese city where North Korean defectors live. And because women make up a large majority of the defectors, it's easy to hide there. But she's again trapped in this situation where she has no legal status in China, very vulnerable to being exploited. Sometimes they're sold as brides. And Mira was forced into sex cam work. So she arrives at this apartment and the director is finally like, this is your new job, sex cam work.
No.
I know. She got paired up with a mentor who would share her room and was told to watch, learn, and practice. Again, this isn't shaming consensual sex work. We're talking about exploitation here, which is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Mira said, I couldn't believe it. It was so humiliating, taking off your clothes like that in front of people. When I burst into tears, they would ask if I was crying because I missed home. And there she's referring to the other cam girls. So, I don't know, that's such a cognitive dissonance, you know? So the sex cam site and a lot of its users were South Korean. They would pay by the minute. So the women were encouraged to keep the men's attention for as long as possible. But anytime Mira showed fear or anything, the director would threaten her to being sent back to North Korea. And because all her family members work in the government, she was just like, no, I'd rather vanish like smoke and die.
Yeah.
There was 9 women in the apartment at any one time. And Mira's first roommate actually escaped with another girl. So Mira was put together with a group of more girls, and that's how she met Jiyoon. Jiyoon had already been in this ring for 3 years, and Jiyoon was just 16.
Oh my God.
When she defected. Both these women are in their 20s now, their late 20s. Jiyoon, her parents divorced when she was 2. Her family fell into poverty, stopped going to school at 11 so she could work. And she decided to go to China for a year to bring money back home. So she intended going back home.
Wow, so she wasn't actually intending to defect initially.
Well, I guess even going away for a year is defecting, So this is awful. The trafficking of women is sometimes referred to as the Korean pig trade by locals living on the border region of China.
Oh, God.
The women's price can range from hundreds to thousands of US dollars. The UN has raised concerns about the high levels of trafficking of North Korean women, but there's no official statistics,
Yeah, this came up again and again as I was researching this. It's a huge risk, and these, so-called brokers who are supposed to help with the escapes and men who pose as being helpers. These women are at huge risk of rape and sexual violence and trafficking and being sold into sexual slavery and all of these things.
And it's also because no one comes back, or once a family member defects, you're trying to hush it up so you don't lose your songbun.
Yeah.
Then also the women back in North Korea aren't informed about it. Like, hey, this is a risk and this is how you look out for a risk like this,
Yeah, and to be honest, it's also a thing that happens a lot within the country. Shall we talk about that for a minute? This is horribly upsetting, but I think we do have to talk about it. So officially, sex work is illegal in North Korea, but there's many sources saying that it definitely happens, and it's often these very vulnerable girls and women being exploited. There's this thing that's called kipumjo, and that is women and girls who are being recruited specifically for the purposes of providing sexual services to high-ranking members of this workers' party, their families and guests and things. And I found one article that talked about the cheerleaders who appeared from North Korea who appeared at the Olympics in the opening ceremony.
Oh no.
Yeah, and this writer says they are sex slaves. The person talking about this was someone called Lee So-yeon, who escaped in 2008, and says, quote, "It might seem like a fancy show on the outside. However, they also have to go to parties and provide sexual services. That sort of pain also followed." And they also describe, there's another defector who talks about teenagers being pulled out of school to serve as sex slaves to Kim Jong-un specifically, talking about officials coming to the schools and picking out the prettiest girls who meet these certain physical criteria, and they're essentially taken to be sex slaves. And if they make a mistake or if they object to it, they can just vanish. They can just disappear.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So this is before we even get to talking about in the military, which is its whole own thing. But yeah, so the sexual violence and the sexual exploitation is rampant, it seems, even, within the country and when they try to escape.
Which, I mean, that combination of poverty, desperation, and cult-like power, it's just a perfect recipe for that exploitation and paedophilia, which is very different to consensual survival sex work in other countries, Oh, it's horrific.
Yeah, it's violence and abuse and exploitation of the worst possible
Yeah.
kind. And God, yeah, I feel like I'm going to cry just talking about this. Yeah.
So the US Department's annual trafficking in persons report has consistently designated North Korea as one of the worst human trafficking nations.
That is entirely unsurprising.
Yeah, with Mira and June, they didn't even know where they were in any country, because they're taken to an apartment blindfolded at night. But then they could see they were in Yanji because of hotel signs outside the window.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, this is so upsetting. When June got there in Yanji, the director tried to send her back to North Korea. Well, no, I think he threatened to do so. He told her she was too dark and ugly. But I wonder if this was an abuse tactic because, as we're going to see, she made him a lot of money. So June said, it's a kind of work I despise the most, but I risked my life to come to China, so I couldn't go back empty-handed. My dream was to feed my grandparents some rice before they leave this world.
Oh my God.
That's why I could endure everything. I wanted to send money to my family. So she worked hard. She was told the director would reward her for good performance, that she would be able to contact her family and send money to them. This is why I think he was gaslighting her and negging her, is because she soon was bringing in more money than the other girls in the house, This real Stockholm Syndrome thing, she wanted to be acknowledged by the director. She thought she'd be the first girl to be released from this work if she was the best.
Oh no.
She would sometimes sleep for only 4 hours a night and hit the daily target of €140. Sorry, that's 140 sterling. She was desperate for this money, and she took Mira under her wing and was like, do what I do and don't rebel, work hard. And if the director doesn't send you home straight away, then, you can work out some freedom and happiness in this life, That's not a direct quote, I'm paraphrasing. So she did get a lot of favoritism because of earning so much money. And she said, I thought he genuinely cared for me, but on the days my earnings went down, the expression on his face would change. He'd tell us off for not trying hard and doing other bad activities, like watching dramas. The apartment was closely guarded by the director's family. His parents slept in the living room and kept the entrance door locked, which is just so fucked up. The director would deliver their food, his brother would come and empty their rubbish, so it's complete confinement.
So she's gone from one kind of absolute control to another.
Completely, and then it's at least under this absolute control, there is this carrot dangling. They were allowed outside once every 6 months if their earnings were high enough, once a month, and they'd get to go shopping and get their hair done, but even then they weren't allowed to talk to anyone, and the director walked very close to us like a lover because he feared we would run away. I wanted to walk around as I wished, but I couldn't. We weren't allowed to speak to anyone, even to buy a bottle of water. I felt like a fool. Then the director appointed one of the North Korean women in the apartment to be a manager while he was away, which is another common abuse tactic we see in
Yeah.
So in the same way the director was promising June he would let her contact her family, he promised Mira that he would marry her off to a good man. And June said, can I be released? I've made you all this money. And suddenly the number would go up, and she needed to earn $53,200 to pay for her trip.
Oh no.
Yeah. And then when she'd meet that, he'd be like, I can't release you because I can't find any brokers, So these two girls, Mira and June, never saw the money they earned through their sex cam work. They were initially told they get 30% of the profits, and they would get that when they were released. But, they started to realize they were never going to be released. And poor June says, killing myself is not what I would normally think about, but I tried to take a drug overdose and jump from the window.
Oh my God.
So, this is horrific, but Mira ended up in this for 5 years and June was in it for 8. Then, a sex cam client of Mira's, who'd been visiting her in the sex cam world for 3 years, took pity on her and put her in touch with a guy, Pastor Chun Ki-won, and he's been helping North Korean defectors for the last 20 years. So this client was able to remotely install a messaging app on Mira's computer so she could communicate with him.
Mm-hmm.
And this pastor, Chung Ki-won, is famous in North Korea. He's often called a kidnapper and a con man. He has a Christian charity that he made in 1999, and he's since helped 1,200 defectors to safety.
Wow. We like him.
Yes,
Yes,
good man.
good
We will
man.
cover him on International Men's Day.
Yes.
So he gets 2 or 3 rescues a month, but he still was like really distressed by Mira and June's case because he said he's never seen girls before who were imprisoned for more than 3 years, you know, so he was just heartbroken, like.
Yeah, that is devastating.
And he said it's, you know, his work is so hard because with all those barriers that we said earlier, the trafficking of female defectors has become more organized, and now even North Korean soldiers guarding the border are involved in this trafficking scam. So he kept in touch with them for a month, posing as a client, and he worked out their exact location, and he sent a volunteer over there to his organization is called Duri Hana. So he's like scouting out the apartment and stuff. I mean, this is like something from a movie. So one night, Mira and Yoon hurled like a torn up knotted bedsheet out a window.
No way.
Climbed down from the 3rd story. The bedsheet goes down and the volunteer ties a rope on it. So they pulled that out and they used the rope to get down. And then they're like getting into people carrier. But getting out of China is actually really dangerous for defectors.
Mm-hmm. I can believe that.
So they're trying to get to South Korean embassy. Traveling across China without an ID is really dangerous. You know, I think we can cover like a Chinese modern day woman in another episode to discuss all of that. So they used to be able to travel with fake IDs, but nowadays, like, officials in China carry around a device and they can tell if the ID is real or not. So it's massive stealth time.
Yeah.
So without an ID, they can't go to a hotel or a hostel. So they have to sleep on trains and on the floor in restaurants. They climb up a mountain for 5 hours. They cross the border. They don't want to name the route in the country that they got into, but they got into that country. 12 days later, they met Chun for the first time, their pastor. So, you know, they said even though the only time they were really safe was when they got their citizenship in South Korea, they were like, meeting him for the first time was just like, oh my God, we might actually have freedom, you know? And they traveled by car for 27 hours in this country to the South Korean embassy. Pastor Chun says North Koreans at this point are so like desensitized to the real world that even car travel is so much for them. And they often get car sick and sometimes faint and vomit all over the place because they're just so not used to being in a car.
Yeah.
And he said it's hellish, you know. The 2 women, they're like, they need to go to South Korea for their own safety. But going to South Korea, they also know they will never see their families again. And that, for both of them, that wasn't their intention when they left.
No.
So they went through the screening process to make sure they're not spies. 3 months at Hanwon, which we discussed. And Mira said, I want to learn English or Chinese so I can become a tour guide. And June says, I want to live a normal life, drinking coffee in a cafe and chatting to friends.
Aww.
Somebody once told me that the rain will one day stop, but for me, the monsoon season lasted so long, I forgot the sun existed.
Oh my God. Wow.
Cry break. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Actually, I feel really unable to talk about, I'll say her name, but I actually at this point feel really unable to talk about Daeun Lee, who was a defector who spent time in the military, and just her story of being raped is horrific.
Yeah.
And the link to the article will be in the show notes. And by show notes, I also mean if you look at our episode on Podbean, the links to all the articles we reference are there. So you can look at it. You don't have to join the Patreon to see them, you know. I just kind of want to say that's there. And she is now living in South Korea and she is safe. I think that's all I can say. Really, I can't go into the story.
Do we want to talk a little bit about how the military works and what the military service is like, or are we deciding that's too horrific?
I feel like talking about it. No, I think talking about it in a general way is quite all right, yeah.
So I looked up quite a lot on this. So North Korea is widely considered to be the most militarized society in the world. Up to kind of 1 in 3 citizens might be a member of one or another military organization. And since 2015, all women have been made to serve in the military, and generally women are expected to serve from the time that they graduate high school up until they turn 24, which one source says is the longest period of conscription anywhere in the world. It's about 7 years. So prior to that, it was only men who were forcibly conscripted, whereas women were conscripted more selectively, or they could choose to serve voluntarily as well.
Yeah.
And sexual violence is a massive, massive problem in the military. So, as we've mentioned, being able to join this workers' party is pretty much essential for anyone who wants to have a safe and secure and successful life. And that's one of the major things that people can get out of being in the military is potentially the ability to gain access to that. But what that means is that these young women are at the mercy of senior male officials who can hold that threat over them, saying that they'll block their chances of joining the party if they refuse certain things, or if they attempt to report it if they're abused. And that means that most women just don't. Most women just don't say anything. I watched this short video interview with a survivor. It was really hard to watch, and I'm not going to talk about some of the things that she describes because it is truly, truly disturbing stuff. It was very hard to watch, and it was only about 5 minutes long. And she describes being called into the office of one of the senior officials and being raped, and then a few months later being forced to undergo an abortion without any kind of pain relief. Because if she refused, she wouldn't have been allowed to join the party, and that would have meant that she was stigmatized for the rest of her life. And she describes surviving on a handful of corn a day. She describes being so malnourished that she only had a period every month. And for women as well, one of the major problems is they don't have access to menstrual products. So they're often using things like gauze from wound dressings and even kind of offcuts from men's vests or socks or things like that instead of sanitary pads. And these all seem to be common stories. These all seem to be like this is what it is like for a lot of women.
Yeah. Something that Daeun said as well, like she also said about the malnutrition.
Yeah.
But she also said like she was fed only 3 spoonfuls of rice during her entire time in the army. Women are told they're not as smart, important, or strong as the men. And any state-issued goods you do get, like even their own uniforms, are items of high value. So your own comrades will steal that from you because they need money to buy food, you know?
Yeah.
It's horrific. I just want to read this from Daeun Lee. You know, like I said, she's safe in South Korea now, but she says, if Korea ever gets reunified, I'm going to find this guy. And even if I can't make him feel 10 times the pain I felt, I want to at least smack him on the right side of his face. And I'm there with you, girl. I'll fly over.
Yeah. That seems like it would be entirely justified.
Yeah, if he's dead, we'll shit on his grave together. Sorry, Jess, what were you going to say?
And all of this is in a country that claims to have gender equality.
And it claims that militarization and the army is so important, but it's not even fucking feeding its soldiers.
They claim a lot of things.
Like that.
To be fair.
That makes no sense to me.
It makes no sense.
At least if you join the army, someone else is in charge of your food and you'll be fed. But like, if their whole army is malnourished, that's...
Yeah.
Anyway.
And that says, again, ultimately, it's all about this absolute control.
Yeah. I found this really great website called dailynk.com. And it's, you know, that's a journal, it's a news site that people are risking their life to run and produce articles for. So give it a look. They had one article which was about general life in South Korea as a defector. And they also do this really sweet thing where they give interviews to specific defectors. So I gathered this information from the general article and an article about Lee Dae-yoon, who is working as a teacher in South Korea now. And it just says, I just want to emphasize, I guess, that like it's still so difficult even when you get to the supposed safe zone.
Yeah.
So she said, the general perception of defectors has improved over the years, but they're still often seen as people who had it tough rather than their fellow countrymen, you know, rather than equals in their new country. And, you know, Lee Dae-yoon hears a lot of like, which I think is very common for anyone who gets othered in society. Just anything she does a bit different or mistakes she makes, it's you know, because they're a defector, you know. And she faced a lot of barriers because of her North Korean accent. She did say this lovely thing, to settle well, one must avoid hiding in the safety zone just because you are lonely. So you're so heavily traumatized, but you also need to fight for this new life you have and get yourself out there, you know?
Yeah.
It's not easy, but you should get yourself out there to experience as much as possible. If you do so, you will realize there are many opportunities available and dreams can come true once you really start wanting them to. Generally, about people who live in South Korea now, historically, arrivals tended to be well educated and integrated easily into South Korean society with the resettlement packages. But all this resettlement work is actually increasingly facing domestic backlash because it's seen as an economic burden. And under South Korean President Moon Jae-in, it's had program cuts. So again, this is from the NK Daily. Most South Koreans don't know a North Korean arrival personally. And that has a huge impact, as we know from research on othering and belonging. That really impacts people's understanding of arrivals and their challenges and successes. And maybe this perception like they're not making an effort to integrate.
Right. It's a concept rather than something that they can put on an individual that they know.
Absolutely. Since the beginning of 2008, 31,339 North Koreans have arrived in South Korea.
I found some stats about kind of the difficulty that defectors have settling as well.
Yes, please tell me those so we can understand it better.
So there was this study released in February 2021, which was by the Korea Hana Foundation, which is an organisation that assists defectors with settling in the South. They polled 3,000 defectors and they found that 17% of them had said that they'd experienced discrimination over the previous 12 months. They said that 44% said that they were treated differently because they were from the North. And they said that 23% said that they had been criticised for not having the same level of education or work skills as those who'd grown up in the South. And they also say that bullying, depression, barriers to basic life things like education, accommodation, employment, that's all really, really common.
Yeah, I have one here from hani.co.kr. Nearly 1 in 5 North Korean defectors said they regret coming to South Korea.
Oh, wow, that's really high.
Because of cultural differences, psychological isolation, and economic issues. And that's from the Seoul National University Institute for Peace and Unification Studies. It was a study conducted between 2011 and 2020 with North Korean defectors who left the year before. And it's, a woman is the senior researcher, Choi Yoon-young Christina. 18.59% of the 312 defectors answered affirmative about regretting coming to South Korea. 84.48% complained about struggles with cultural differences. 70.69% with psychological isolation. 65.52% with economic issues. They were found to be struggling more amid the COVID-19 pandemic. They quoted one woman in her 30s who said, with COVID-19, it's like we're prisoners. It's frustrating. I can't even attempt to do anything, which again is like that emotional flashback I was talking about, you know. I have to send money to the North too. I can't go anywhere. My head is just spinning and I can't predict what the future holds. Oh, I hope that woman's okay now.
Oh my God, me too.
Stick with it. It gets better. We're through the other side of the pandemic. Yeah, not having friends or, you know, their relatives with them. 90% said they felt close with South Koreans, but a lower percentage answered yes when asked whether South Koreans were accepting. Oh, this is very interesting. They've quoted another person here. I don't know the gender of this interviewee. In the case of one North Korean defector in their 20s, they said, South Koreans are nice, but don't seem to include you, and that they act and speak in friendly ways while showing discrimination in their thoughts.
Oh, wow.
The suicide rate for defectors is over double that of South Koreans. Oh, God.
That's so sad.
Yeah. That thing of, I had an Indian friend years ago said it to me. He said, most Irish people are like very nice and they'll say hello and everything. But when it comes to being your friend or hanging out, it's not happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Othering and belonging is a global issue.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. Oof.
So I'd just like to end all these stories by saying their names once more as well. Big love, and I hope they're okay. Mira and Yoon, who were the defectors that an asshole exploited into sex trafficking. Daeung Lee, who was in the military and sadly experienced very common outright sexual assault in the military. Yaomini Park, great Instagram, is very good looking, but is saying some very worrying things, and I hope she's okay too. Because it's not a sign of being okay to join the right wing right now. And Lee Da-yoon, who's the teacher in South Korea.
Wow. Great stories, great choices. This one is bleak in a bunch of ways, but I hope they're okay. I really do. And I hope that somehow things get better for all of the 25 million people who are stuck under that regime at the moment.
Now feels like we really, really need a good fucking gratitude corner.
Oh, God. We do, don't we? And
a good one.
And my brain now is just like sadness, and yeah.
I'm exhausted after that. I couldn't even remember South Korea a minute ago.
Also, I fell down a bunch of rabbit holes in my research, some of which we did not get to cover because there's so much. So my show notes for this one are pretty extensive. So enjoy, Patreon people, I guess, if you want to read some more on some of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on.
The link to all the articles we looked at, the Podbean.
Yes.
So have a click through if you want to do that as well. Also, send us a coffee then if you do it, if you use our links.
Go on then, Grace. What are you grateful for this week?
I mean, we're both grateful we don't live in North Korea. As awful as Tory Island is.
Yes.
Oh my God, as awful as the politicians in Ireland are as well. Jesus Christ. Well, the current ruling ones. We're both grateful we live in countries that have gun control.
Oh, yeah. There's got to be something good that I can say for this week.
Will I tell you about my plans for the rest of the day?
Yes, please.
Because they're all right.
Yes, tell me about that.
Okay, I'm going to go to my hometown.
Excellent.
Which is 20 minutes from where I'm currently living. And I have a bunch of little admin bitties to do adulting. And I'm going to get a coffee with my cousin who showed me how to use TikTok. And we will talk about Fortnite. Is that still a thing? We will vape dankly. I don't know.
You're just saying words now, Grace.
I know. I don't actually talk like this at her.
Whenever I try and keep up with Gen Zers, I'm reminded of that how you doing today, fellow kids meme.
Yes. And then I'm going to go to my parents' house for a curry. My parents have a porch, so anytime I order something online, I send it to their house, and I haven't seen them in 2 weeks, and I've ordered so much stuff. So it's going to be like, haul.
So you're going to come back with a bunch of presents from past you to present you.
Oh my God, the best. What are you doing for the rest of your day, Jess?
I am also seeing my parents tonight, and we are going to a vegan Indian restaurant in Leicester, which is fabulous, and I love it, and the food is always really good.
I guess in other fun upcoming gratitude news things, I'm hoping by the time this episode goes out, we will be able to put a little clip before it announcing our first live show.
Yeah, that would be really fun. I hope we can make that work. Okay, anyhow, sorry this one was a lot today, folks, but I think it was an important subject, and I think we learned some things and talked about some awesome women. So, women's history is not always fun and happy.
No, into the darkness. And I mean, there's no mainstream podcast where Hitler isn't mentioned, so I just think it's fucking, part of being honest about our history is And our present is like courageously being unavoidant of the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And this was fucking uncomfortable, Jess. It's been a pleasure.
Sometimes things just suck.
Until next time, end direct provision, improve resources for refugees, make an effort to welcome them into your life.
Yes.
And love women.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, I hate it.